India could have been the next China. Instead, it became a cautionary tale. Kuan Yew, the founding father of modern Singapore and one of the sharpest geopolitical minds of the 20th century, visited India in the 1950s full of hope. He saw a country rich in culture, democratic ideals, and human capital. But by the 1970s, that optimism had collapsed. His verdict? India would be a military giant, but never an economic one. A nation of unfulfilled greatness, he called it. And the symbolism wasn't lost on him. At a dinner in the Rashtrapati Bhavan, the Indian presidential palace, the cutlery was so poor that a knife literally broke in his hand. That's not just bad hospitality. It's a metaphor for the Indian state itself, grand from a distance, broken when you touch it. And here's a quote from the late, great Charlie Munger. India is defective because they have taken the worst aspects of U.S. culture, allowing a whole bunch of idiots to scream and stop everything. So what happened? To understand India's failure, you have to understand the choices it made after independence. In 1947, both India and Singapore had just shrugged off colonial rule. But while Singapore turned itself into a global financial hub with one of the highest metrics in every positive index, India clung to a dream of Fabian socialism, an economic ideology built on redistribution, state control, and suspicion of foreign capital. Kuan Yew, like Nehru, was influenced by the British Fabian Society at first, but Lee quickly realized that before you can redistribute wealth, you have to actually create it. Before distributing the pie, he said, I had to bake it. India, on the other hand, got stuck in bake sale politics, trying to carve up a pie it had never baked, trying to equally divide the curry while having an empty curry pot. Bharat netizens love to compare themselves to China, so let's do that. China, just like India, also believed in some form of socialism to benefit their vast population. But after the turbulence of the 60s and 70s, they realized the same thing as Kuan Yew, that they had to entice foreign capital to learn and grow their technology, productivity, and infrastructure. So they did. And a few decades later, China has grown into a superpower by every metric, and not just in name like some Bharat netizens say about India. Instead of welcoming global companies and modernizing fast, India shut itself off. Import substitution, central planning, and an obsession with self-reliance created what economists now call the license Raj. Want to start a business? You needed permits. Want to grow it? More permits. Want to innovate? Better be prepared for years of red tape. Meanwhile, Singapore, just a tiny island with zero natural resources, did the opposite. It invited Western multinationals in. It welcomed capital, technology, and competition. It focused on meritocracy, discipline, and global integration. And within a few decades, Singapore had higher life expectancy, better healthcare, world-class infrastructure, and a thriving middle class. India, despite its size and talent, remained poor, polluted, and plagued by inefficiency. Its bureaucracy, Lee noted, was stifling. Even the symbolic heart of power, the presidential palace, was visibly deteriorating. That's not just cosmetic, it's rotten at the core. Just like what Cristiano Ronaldo said about Manchester United, the same facilities that were there over a decade ago were still there when he returned. Nothing changed. And to those who say that Singapore is only possible because it's a city-state, well, let's compare it to Mumbai. Singapore has a GDP of $500 billion and a PPP of $700 billion. Mumbai has a GDP of just over $300 billion and a PPP of $400 billion. Mumbai's city proper has a population of 12.5 million, whereas Singapore has a population of just under 6 million, half that of Mumbai, yet outshining it in every way, shape, and form. Today, India still pitches itself as a rising superpower. Politicians like to shout about its military might that can barely defend against Pakistani drones, its space missions that only use animated graphics and not real images, and its giant population, which 80% of them are living under $6 per day. But the same fundamental problems remain: broken institutions, rampant inequality, poor governance, and an economy that still doesn't deliver for most of its people. And here's the irony: India had every advantage in the post-colonial era: a democratic system, English-speaking elites, a huge internal market, access to global trade, a large, fertile landmass which includes temperate to tropical climates. So why didn't it work? Because unlike Kuan Yew, India's leaders never truly prioritized competence. Nehru was an idealist with no stomach for tough decisions. His successors doubled down on bloated government programs and populism. India mistook policy for progress and slogans for strategy. Lee made painful decisions. He cracked down on corruption, demanded results, and made growth, not ideology, the top priority. He said during an interview that he was not in the business to be loved, but to progress his country. India's leaders are in the business to make speeches, and the result? Today, Singapore's per capita GDP is over 15 times higher than India's. A tiny island with no resources outperformed a subcontinent of over 1 billion people. Let that sink in. So how can modern India fix this? In my humble opinion, India needs to stop subsidizing their cheap mobile and Wi-Fi sector and institute a nationwide ban on smartphones for a certain age group, for example, under 14 years old. If they can waste money and resources on 500,000 soldiers in Kashmir, then they can do this. They also need to further refine their special economic zones. Reading up on them, they seem to offer some good things but are still over-regulated and bureaucratic. For example, ClearTax reports that over 10 million square feet of built-up area remains vacant in India's special economic zones. But if they manage to do this, then the coastal areas will see a rush of foreign investment and an explosion in migration as cheap labor will flock to these coastal cities. Instead of customer service, call centers, and IT companies, actual manufacturing and production companies will naturally and organically develop, just as they did in China. And the laborers from inland regions will send money back to their regions and families, naturally spreading economic activity. Basic education, which focuses on reasoning and critical thinking rather than memorization, must also be enforced on the population. That's the only way the next generation will break free from the disgusting extremism and nationalism we see thrive in current India. Hindu extremism and caste discrimination would take a back seat, and focus on progress, development, research, and erudition would increase. Lee's criticism wasn't just about cutlery. It was about a country with limitless potential, suffocated by bad governance, lazy economic thinking, and a refusal to embrace the modern world. And even now, decades later, India hasn't fully learned the lesson. Protectionism is back. Bureaucracy still crushes innovation. And instead of facing these hard truths, Indian leaders wrap themselves in nationalism and PR campaigns. Make in India, they say. But where are the factories? Where are the jobs? Modi and the BJP have stifled every form of progress and replaced it with slogans, chants, crackdowns, and populism. India had the chance to lead the global south, not just as a loud democracy, but as a rich, powerful, and respected one. Instead, it's a country that talks like a tiger but limps like a cow. Lee Kuan Yew didn't say these things to insult India. He said them because he wanted India to succeed, but he understood that dreams don't build nations, discipline does, pragmatism does, and India chose neither. If you found this video insightful, then please like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.